Assalamu alaikum. Today we'll be shedding light on the grand chessboard and how a Europe-Russia war serves America's supremacy. A series of geopolitical events from Brexit to the ongoing war in Ukraine appear to be interconnected steps in a grand strategy to ensure America's status as the world's dominant superpower. As tensions escalate between Europe and Russia, the key question arises: who benefits the most? The answer appears to be the United States of America. By weakening Europe and Russia, Washington would eliminate two potential challenges to its global supremacy, while maintaining control over the international financial and security order. Here, we will investigate the four-stage process through which America has allegedly orchestrated global instability. The first step was Brexit to weaken the European Union. Second, global inflation to strain European economies. Third, mass migration to destabilize Western societies. And fourth, war to ensure US dominance. It has been analyzed how the Ukraine conflict fits into this broader strategy, the growing rift between America and its European allies, and the recent Trump-Zelensky meeting hints at a shift in US policy towards Ukraine. Discussing the first step, Brexit, weakening European economy and unity, Brexit was the first significant move in the US strategy to prevent Europe from emerging as a global powerhouse when the European Union was established. A united Europe with a standard economic policy and increasing military collaboration could have been a formidable rival to Washington's influence. The UK's departure from the European Union in 2020 fractured the bloc, diminishing its ability to counterforce US policy. While publicly neutral, many American politicians, including President Trump, celebrated Brexit as a victory. Without the UK, the EU lost a major military and diplomatic force, leaving Germany and France to struggle with internal disagreements and weakening Europe's geopolitical reach. The second step was global inflation. The next phase of the strategy involved economic warfare. The past few years have seen inflation skyrocket, hitting Europe especially hard. While multiple factors contributed, including the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war, US fiscal and monetary policy played a key role. Trillions of dollars in the US stimulus spending flooded the global economy, only for the Federal Reserve to hike interest rates aggressively later. The policy shift sucked capital back into the US, strengthening the dollar while making European currencies weaker and increasing import costs. The economic strain has been immense for Europe. Energy shortages, supply chain disruptions, and soaring prices have hampered growth. As European economies weaken, they become more dependent on US support, further consolidating Washington's influence over European policy decisions. The third step was mass migration. The destabilization of Europe continued with mass migration. Wars in Middle East and Africa, many triggered by US interventions, including Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan, have resulted in waves of refugees headed towards Europe. The influx has fueled political instability, strengthened far-right movements, and caused friction among EU nations. More recently, the Ukraine war has created another migration crisis. Millions of Ukrainians have fled to European countries, straining resources and increasing economic and social pressures. While the US has provided some support to Ukraine, the humanitarian and economic burden has fallen mainly on Europe, further entangling the continent in a crisis that Washington helped perpetuate. The last step is war in this grand strategy, and it appears to be direct military confrontation between Europe and Russia. A large-scale war would devastate both sides, leaving America as the sole remaining superpower. Since 2022, the US has been Ukraine's biggest supporter, providing weapons and intelligence, but this backing has mainly been self-serving. Much of the aid given to the Ukraine flows back into the US economy through military contracts. The war has also allowed the US to sever Europe's energy dependencies on Russia, ensuring that European nations remain tied to American energy exports for the foreseeable future. If the war escalates into a direct NATO-Russia conflict, the damage to Europe will be catastrophic. Infrastructure destruction, economic collapse, and potential nuclear escalation would leave the continent weakened for decades. Meanwhile, the US would remain insulated from the physical devastation, profiting from arms sales and post-war reconstruction contracts. The Ukraine conflict fits perfectly into the broadest US strategy. It has significantly weakened Russia while entangling Europe in an expensive, prolonged war effort. European nations have drained their arsenals, diverted billions into military contracts, and suffered economic backlash from severed ties with Moscow. If the war escalates further, with NATO members like the UK, France, or Germany engaging more directly against Russia, the outcome would be devastating. Russia would face the overwhelming military pressure, but Europe would bear the brunt of destruction. Meanwhile, the US would continue to supply weapons and manage the conflict from afar, ensuring that both sides exhaust themselves in prolonged warfare. Now we turn our focus to the Trump-Zelensky meeting and whether it hints toward a shift in US policy. After humiliating the premiers of France and the United Kingdom and a representative of the European Union, a recent meeting between President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed how cracks in the US commitment to Ukraine have emerged. Trump reportedly criticized Zelensky for not showing enough gratitude for US aid, bluntly stating that Ukraine could fight Russia alone if it refused to negotiate a peace deal. The meeting signaled a potential shift in Washington's strategy. Trump and other policymakers may scale back support for Ukraine and push Europe to take on more burden. By stepping back, the US would let the war evolve into a full-scale conflict between Russia and Europe, achieving its ultimate objective: a weakened Europe, a broken Russia, and an unchallenged America. A significant point of contention between the US and Europe is the actual level of American support for Ukraine. While President Trump claims they have provided $350 billion in aid, European leaders argue that the figure is much lower, closer to $119 billion, with most benefiting American arms manufacturers rather than directly supporting Ukraine. European nations have contributed significantly, sending weapons, absorbing refugees, and suffering economic fallout from cutting ties with Russia. However, Washington continues to portray Europe as not doing enough, pressuring EU leaders to escalate their involvement further. At the same time, the UK has reportedly deployed soldiers in Ukraine, taking far more significant risks than the US. While Britain, France, and Germany see Russia as a direct threat, Washington maintains a strategic distance, ensuring that Europe remains the primary battlefield. The US has pressured Europe into conflict and driven wedges between European allies. By painting some countries like the UK and Poland as good allies and others like Germany and France as hesitant, Washington has effectively divided European leadership. The tactic ensures that Europe remains fragmented and unable to formulate an independent foreign policy, while US defense contractors profit and Washington continues to dictate the conflict's pace, keeping its military primarily out of harm's way. Now, the ultimate outcome of this full-scale war between Europe and Russia would be devastation for both the parties involved. Europe's economy would collapse, its infrastructure would be in ruin, and its military would be exhausted. Russia, even if not entirely defeated, would be irreversibly weakened. The United States, however, would emerge unscathed, shielded by geography. It would face no direct consequences of the war. Instead, it would consolidate its global dominance by ensuring that Europe remains dependent on US aid and security guarantees. American arms manufacturers and corporations would profit immensely from the war effort and the post-war rebuilding process. The evidence suggests that a potential Europe-Russia war would primarily serve US strategic interests. By systematically weakening both Europe and Russia, Washington ensures its continued supremacy in the global order. The four-stage process, from Brexit to economic destabilization to war, has kept Europe in a state of dependency while eroding Russia's strength. The Ukraine conflict, far from being a purely defensive struggle, is a key part of this larger plan. As tensions escalate, European leaders must ask themselves, are they genuinely fighting for their own interests or pawns in a larger American strategy? The coming months may reveal whether Europe will blindly follow Washington into a war or seek an alternative path to preserve its future.